The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The North Kesteven series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to North Kesteven, everybody. I've got 7 left for you in this part of Lincolnshire, and by the end of this working week that'll be down to 2. Now, believe it or not, as well as some massive towns which remain in this district, there are some small villages as well, and this parish has got 2 of them. This is Ashby, Launde and Bloxham. Ashby, Launde and Bloxham, ash tree farm belonging to the Launde family and Blox homestead. We have 7 left to cover in North Kesteven, and 5 of them will fall this week, leaving us with just 2. These 5 are the remaining villages, the other 2 are the only towns in the district. The first 2 of these 5 are among the smallest of this bit of Lincolnshire, but that doesn't mean they should be overlooked. Today we're in Ashby, Launde and Bloxham, which despite its small stature contains a population of almost 800 people. That's because the northernmost reaches of it cover half of RAF Digby and the houses that are tied to that. We've already been there, and if you want to learn a bit about the airbase, you need the Scotwick episode. Today we're only focusing on the tiny communities of Ashby and Bloxham themselves, and they're very different. Both of them sit on a limestone formation known as the Cornbrash. Several limestone streams arise from this area and flow east. Ashby's main street has 3 main features, these being its church, an old hall and the village hall. Bloxham struggles to be defined as a village in the traditional sense. There's no main cluster, instead it's sporadically laid out around a few houses and farms, but it does include a church and an old hall of its own. Neither place has seen huge waves of residential development, and although they do possess some modern housing, they're still very much based around their older properties. This is, after all, a part of rural Lincolnshire that's generally been unspoilt for centuries. I say, long may that remain. Let's explore both of these and see what secrets they hold. Starting off our journey through Ashby, Launde and Bloxham, we have the latter, the tiny settlement of Bloxham. This is situated approximately 1 mile southwest of Digby on a minor lane that can be seen from the B1198. Bloxham used to be a parish in its own right until, in 1931, it was combined with Ashby to give us the modern boundaries. Its last recorded population was 79. There can't be many more than that who reside here today. Bloxham is little more than a collection of houses, somewhat sporadically laid out along a collection of minor roads. There are 2 main landmarks here though. Bloxham has a church dedicated to St Mary, and that can be found off a drive that leads to the other landmark, Bloxham Hall. St Mary's Church was built in around 1300, although nobody is totally sure of the exact date. Both arcades seem to date from that year or thereabouts. Unusually, its perpendicular tower is built into its nave, which makes it rather thin appearance-wise. The nicest features of the church are considered to be the alterations made in 1812. They were carried out by General Manners of Bloxham Hall. It was he who rebuilt the chancel and the porch here. His coat of arms is proudly displayed over the porch entrance today. It's made of Code stone and it's signed Code and Sealy 1813. Manners also gave the nave and the chancel their plaster rib vault. Yeah, apologies for the long shots, people, but there doesn't seem to be any way to access the churchyard. This track that I'm currently standing on is the one that leads up to Bloxham Hall, and I was expecting there to be like a little footpath across this field behind me to get to the church, but there isn't. So how you get to the churchyard here is well and truly beyond me, but at least I've covered it. At least I've covered it. Now, speaking of Bloxham Hall, that's next. So this is Bloxham Hall, a partially demolished early 18th century country house. The surviving north wing of the hall now serves as a farmhouse and it's Grade 2 listed. Bloxham Hall was built in 1707 for Septimus Cyprian Thornton. It was enlarged in 1772 by the addition of the north wing by the architect Louis Villamy. The hall was to become the home of the Duchess of Rutland, from whom it descended to General Lord Robert Manners and his son George Manners. Manners Jr. was the High Sheriff of Lincolnshire for 1826. As well as making changes to the church, it was under his watch that the hall gained a stable block, which is also now Grade 2 listed. He died unmarried, leaving the estate to his great niece Mary, who married the MP and Privy Councillor Robert Nisbet Hamilton. When he died in 1887, the Ogilvy family took over because Hamilton's daughter Mary, who predeceased him, was married to Henry Ogilvy. The Ogilvys held many homes in Scotland, and Bloxham was somewhat surplus to requirements for them. As such, it was sold off. It was eventually abandoned in the 1940s, and the older main wing was demolished in 1963, leaving only the newer north wing still standing. So now let's drive to Ashby, and on the way let's discuss a bit of history about the place. Ashby de la Launde is a small village, but it's definitely larger than Bloxham. In the Domesday Book, the village was called Ashby, and it comprised 2 manors. These were in the possession of Ralph Paynell and Colsfine of Lincoln. A later lord of the manor, William de Ashby, founded the Knights Templar Preceptory at Temple Bruer in around 1150, and even joined the order himself. In time, the preceptory became the second wealthiest in Britain. Although linked to Ashby, it sits within its own parish, Temple Bruer with Temple High Grange, although the 2 civil entities do share the same parish council today. One of William's descendants, another William in fact, gave the Knights Templar the right to appoint a priest at Ashby's church, dedicated to St Hybald. In return, the Templars would provide a chaplain to perform services in a private chapel dedicated to St Margaret in the de Ashby's manor house. That house, which was built in 1220, was a rectangular 2-storied semi-fortified manor according to records, so it must have been quite the home given the time. In the 13th century, William's granddaughter, Cecilia, married Walter de la Launde. He was the lord of the manor of Laceby. Upon the death of her father, Jordan de Ashby, in 1260, Cecilia would inherit Ashby Manor, and that's when the settlement became known as Ashby de la Launde. The de la Launde family finally lost their land holdings in the area at some point in the mid-16th century, probably as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII. Okay, so here we are then in Ashby de la Launde, and it's a very linear village this. I'm just making my way to my start point. I've driven basically to my end point and heading back to where we will begin this walk, and this is not going to be the longest walk in the world. Ashby de la Launde is a very tiny village, but it does have a few little secrets to tell. Yes, this walk through Ashby won't take long. We already know about the de la Launde part of the name, but what about Ashby? Well, it possibly derives from the old Danish personal name, Aski. Alternatively, the meaning might be the farmstead village where ash trees grow, and the likelihood is that's probably the right one. So now you know a little bit more about Ashby and how it was formed and how its name came about. What does it have in terms of landmarks? Well, not much. Ashby village is a linear one, stretching for around a quarter or maybe a third of a mile along one main street between the B1198 and the B1191. A pleasant village, hidden away from the major thoroughfares, Ashby sits on a broken declivity 7 miles north of Sleaford. Contained within the modest chunk of land it occupies is a church, a village hall, a water tower and a 16th century former manor house that's had a lot happen to it over the years. This narrow lane off the main street leads to the church. It's known as Church Avenue and has a handful more houses on one side of the road only. Where these abruptly stop, you might think that's it as far as civilization goes, but keep going because you'll soon find yourself stood in the churchyard at St Hybald's. St Hybald's Church is an ancient edifice of stone in the early English style, consisting of a chancel, a nave, a north porch and a plain embattled western tower with a small spire. It has 5 bells. It was originally built in the 12th century with additions or alterations in the 13th and 15th. It's constructed of limestone rubble and it has a plain tile roof. The chancel and the nave were rebuilt in 1854 after being redesigned by a Mr. Huddleston. The cost of the rebuild was covered by the Reverend John William King. Now, King is an important name to Ashby de la Launde, as we'll learn shortly. Inside this church, there are several King family memorials. For example, there were portions of a Jacobean monument to Edward King and his wives Mary and Elizabeth in the chancel, but their kneeling effigies are now placed on a ledge in the north wall. Opposite are those of their daughters, Mary, Anne and Elizabeth, and of a baby in a cradle representing Amy, a 4th daughter of Edward King by his 2nd wife. On the chancel arch is a small slab inscribed to Edward King and his family, and below it are the remains of 4 Latin lines, which translate to "He restored the church in 1605. There were 2 monuments in here commemorating Simon and Isabel de la Launde, one of which remained in the north part of the nave until that restoration in 1854. Yeah, no such issues getting into this churchyard. It's very simple. You just walk straight down Church Avenue and you can't miss the gates. They're right in front of you. And we are now going to turn around and head back through those gates, actually, which you can see right there. And back up Church Avenue towards the village hall. Now, this is a very interesting building, and you'll see why in a second. At the other end of the lane, which runs down to the church, is Ashby Village Hall. Now, keep this building in mind for later because it forms part of the story behind the 16th century Ashby Hall. This was erected on its present site in the 1950s after being moved from elsewhere in the village. It has a programme of regular events. These include an over-60s club, a book group, a pop-up pub and a wine club. Small it may be, but it helps to keep Ashby's community together. Heading westwards now, the next thing you pass along Main Street is Ashby's water tower, standing tall amongst its leafy backdrop. Although it's a reinforced concrete structure, which, let's be honest, isn't very visually appealing, this does plenty more than just supply water to the village. In addition, it's a useful support for the local broadband transmission. In 2010, residents here were told that high-speed broadband was unlikely to reach Ashby de la Launde in the near future. That prompted them to bring in an external company to lay a fibre optic ring main around the village, and the water tower somehow helped. I don't know how, I'm not a technician. Where the houses end, there's a drinking fountain with a badly weathered inscription. It reads, "Wash thy sin, not thy countenance only." This has been here since at least 1905. Also at the western end of the village is a track that leads to Ashby Hall. As you can see, it's private, but that won't stop us talking about what's up there. Ashby Hall was built in 1595 by the King family using the original Norman manor house as part of its foundations. Its most notable owners were Colonel Edward King, the Member of Parliament for Great Grimsby, and his father-in-law Sir Edward Askew. Colonel King was a strong supporter of Oliver Cromwell and served as a captain in the Parliamentarian Army as well as Governor of Boston during the Commonwealth. Despite his strong Republican and nonconformist beliefs, he's credited as being the first Member of Parliament to call for the restoration of Charles II. Between 1814 and 1835, the hall was used as a girls' school, but the family would retake possession of it soon afterwards. Several other King family members lived at the hall. John William King, a parson and noted racehorse breeder for instance, was owner of Ashby Hall in 1841. In 1874, his filly, Apology, won the Triple Crown of the 1,000 Guineas, the Oaks and the St Leger. You could say he was a pretty successful man when it came to horses. Mind you, his equine activities didn't please everyone. When they came to the attention of Bishop Wordsworth of Lincoln, he demanded King resign from his church position. Ashby Hall remained in the King family until the late 19th century when it passed through the female line to Colonel William Vere Reeve King Fane of Fulbeck. In 1925 he sold it to George Canning, the 4th Baron Garver, who sold his Irish estates near Londonderry and moved his family to Ashby Hall. Garver rebuilt and modernised parts of the hall and built a large wooden indoor badminton court that was later re-sited. We've actually seen that building already. It became Ashby Village Hall. Lord Garver moved to Keswick at the beginning of World War II, and by 1942 various fighter squadrons based at RAF Digby had taken over Ashby Hall as their officers' mess. One of the most notable was the 609 White Rose Squadron. By the end of the war, the house became derelict and stood empty until the estate was broken up in the late 1950s. The park was cleared of its oak trees and the walled garden and surrounding farms were sold separately, leaving the hall itself seemingly on its own. It was to become an entertainment venue called the Lake Rendezvous Club, and acts to perform at it included huge showbiz names like Diana Dawes, Bob Monkhouse and Ken Dodd. In 1960 the hall was purchased by Roy Baines from Ruskington, who renovated parts of the building. He converted it into Ashby Hall Country Club. It could then boast facilities like a nightclub, a swimming pool and a fishing lake, which could also accommodate boating and water skiing. Members paid an annual fee. Baines lived there with his wife June and 3 children until it was sold to the Ward family in the late 1960s, rebranding slightly to Ashby Country Club. The club eventually closed in 1992 and the hall went on to become the headquarters of a defence and security manufacturing company. And that's going to bring us to the end of our walk through Ashby de la Launde, and now you know a bit more about this village and Bloxham and the parish as a whole. But I can't help but feel that this is only part of Ashby's story, because the next parish we're about to cover sort of completes it, and you'll see why tomorrow. So after visiting Ashby de la Launde and Bloxham, it feels like we've completed part 1 of 2. That's because its neighbour holds the key to the rest of its story. As we mentioned earlier, Ashby's history is linked heavily to the Knights Templar, and tomorrow we're off to see where the preceptory was. Join me there, folks, for more here in North Kesteven. Welcome back to North Kesteven again, everybody. Now this one's a bit of a special one. You can see behind me there's a big tower. Now that is the only remaining thing of a Knights Templar preceptory which stood right here in this parish. We've seen churches, we've seen chapels, we've seen cathedrals, we've seen all sorts of religious buildings. We've never seen anything quite like this. You can find that in the parish of Temple Bruer with Temple High Grange. Temple Bruer with Temple High Grange, Heathland with a Knight's Temple. So today in North Kesteven we're completing the story we started yesterday in Ashby de la Launde by visiting the parish next door. This is Temple Bruer with Temple High Grange, a former extra-parochial area which in the medieval period was held by the Knights Templar and later the Knights Hospitaller of Temple Bruer Preceptory. By an Act of Parliament passed in 1879, Temple Bruer with Temple High Grange became a parish, and so it remains today, sharing its administrative powers with Ashby de la Launde and Bloxham. What remains of the preceptory is now a tourist attraction in these parts. It sits within a farm which does allow access to it, so we will get to see this ancient piece of history firsthand. All that remains of it now is a 13th century tower which is Grade 1 listed. Very few Knights Templar sites are left in England with any standing ruins, and so Temple Bruer can be considered very special. The village's name comes from its Templar ownership and its position in the middle of the Lincoln Heath. Temple is obvious, but Bruer? Maybe not. Bruer comes from the French term bruyère, which means heather. At the time, French was the language spoken most in England. As well as the temple ruins, there are 3 other listed buildings, but they're not nearly as important as the tower. Temple Bruer also contains an area known as Thompson's Bottom, where there's another religious building, the Church of St. John. Passing through the area too is the line of the old Roman road, Ermine Street, although here it's just a bridleway. Let's go and explore it all and bring Temple Bruer to life. Temple Bruer can be split into 2 pieces. These are about half a mile apart and lie on 2 separate roads, linked only by a small track that's not designed for cars. These 2 areas, namely, are Temple Farm, where the ruins of the Knights Templar Preceptory can be found, and Thompson's Bottom, which has a Grade 2 listed farmhouse, and the Church of St. John. So this is that church, sited all on its own on a bend in the road through Thompson's Bottom. It was built in 1874 by James Fowler of Louth. Although it occupies an isolated position and would be considered to be irregularly sited now, it was built at a time when there were many farm labourers living within this area. They would have needed somewhere to go to church, and when that's taken into account, all of a sudden this doesn't seem to be quite so random. It's a plain building, but its wooden bell turret and spire adds some interest to it. Part of it is a former village school, built in the same year. Today, that's used as a church hall. Among its highlights is a stained glass window memorial to Lady Florence Chaplin, who died in childbirth in 1881. The Chaplin family lived at Blankney Hall, but owned all of the land in Temple Bruer at one time. They also had a residence at Temple Farm. There's a war memorial in St. John's Churchyard too. It was made by William Henry Maxey and Son of Eastgate in Sleaford. It was unveiled on the 31st of July 1920. Okay, so if you look on the average map of this area, you might be forgiven for thinking that that church is the only thing of note here. Well, you couldn't be much further from the truth. Now we're going to take a drive via the A15 to the other part of Temple Bruer, and this has got the most magnificent landmark ever. Now, just before we go any further, here's an example of some bad driving on the A15. So to get to Temple Farm, it's pretty simple. You have 2 ways to do it, but only one way is possible via car. You can walk the half a mile between the 2 segments of Temple Bruer by using a byway, but if, like me, you want to drive, you have to go to the A15 before heading southwards to Temple Road. The remains of Temple Bruer Preceptory can be found within Temple Farm, a small complex off Temple Road that consists of a farmyard and a few houses. To all intents and purposes, the complex defines the main Temple Bruer village, if you can call it that. You're absolutely within your rights to access the remains of the preceptory, so don't be put off by how private it all looks. So let's head into Temple Farm. You're on a restricted byway here, so even though you can't bring a vehicle in, walking through this is all legal. All that remains of the preceptory is a 13th century tower, and it's pretty easy to spot. It stands all on its own amongst a handful of houses. Let's not totally overlook these buildings, by the way. The farmhouse, which stands to the south of the preceptory's tower, was built in the 1840s for Charles Chaplin of Blakeney Hall. It's likely it was designed by the architect William Adams Nicholson, who acted as Chaplin's estate architect. Okay, here we are then. We've made our way through Temple Farm, and behind me there stands the tower, the last remaining part of the Temple Brewer Preceptory, which of course no longer otherwise stands. So let's see what I can tell you about this. There's lots to talk about as regards this building, but also lots to talk about as regards the Knights Templar in general. Enjoy. Temple Brewer is unique as far as ancient preceptory sites go. It's one of the few Knights Templar locations left in England where any ruins remain standing. The ruin consists of a totally intact square south tower. This once belonged to the Temple Church, and it was one of a pair that stood to the north and south of a chancel or a presbytery. The preceptory tower was formerly looked after by Heritage Lincolnshire, but today it's currently in the care of Lincolnshire County Council. Temple Brewer Preceptory was founded in the period between 1150 and 1160 and remained in control of the area until the order was dissolved in 1312. Although an exact date can't be ascertained for its foundation, it was definitely during the reign of King Henry II. The tentative date is based on the grant of a market given by him to William Eshelby of Ashby, who soon afterwards became a member of the order himself. There were several other benefactors, namely Maud de Cors, John Danecourt, Robert of Everingham, William de Vesey, and Gilbert of Ghent. The lands it controlled were quite extensive. They stretched across Ashby de la Launde, whose pasturage was used for sheep grazing. They also held land in Rowston, Heckington, and Burton Pedwardine. It must have been quite the establishment. In the vicinity of this tower there was a small village, believed to have simply been known as Bruer, a French word meaning heath. French was, after all, the main language in England at the time of its foundation. Long since deserted, it lay to the south in a dry valley. Aerial photographs would suggest it was a walled enclosure with a gatehouse. The main house of the preceptory seems to have been of considerable size and importance. Indeed, the Brethren were allowed to crenellate its great gate in 1306. 2 years later, the order was suppressed in France, and King Edward II sent John de Cornwall, the Sheriff of Lincolnshire, with 12 knights and their forces to arrest the Templars of Temple Brewer. For a time, they were held at Clasket Gate in Lincoln before being sent to the Tower of London. The order was totally suppressed by Pope Clement V in 1312. At that point, Templar properties were to be transferred to the Knights Hospitallers, but it took until the mid-1330s for that process to be completed. The remains of this site have been excavated twice, firstly by Reverend Dr. Oliver, a former rector of Scotwick in 1832, and secondly by Sir William St. John Hope in 1908. The Templars were known to feud a lot with their neighbours, and they possessed the power to execute criminals within their own liberties. It seems that definitely went on here. It would appear this was quite a violent place, given Oliver's discoveries. He found some underground vaults, or dungeons if you will, when he was here. In one was the skeleton of a man who appears to have died in a sitting posture. Another was found with only one tooth in his head. His body seems to have been thrown down, as if from a trapdoor. Underneath the cloisters between the church and the tower, many human bones were discovered which appear to have been thrown together in the utmost confusion and lying at different depths. Amongst those were the skeleton of a very young child and the skull of an adult with a round hole in the upper part, possibly made by a knife or a blunt object. The dungeons also had several large square stones with rings attached to them, presumably for the purposes of chaining people up or maybe even some sort of torture. Perhaps most horrifyingly, Oliver found what he described as a horrible cavern which had clearly been set on fire at some point. Although made of stone, its walls were burnt and had assumed the colour of brick. It's believed it was some sort of medieval oven where bodies, dead or alive, were burnt. Well, let me tell you folks, that is an awesome experience. If you ever find yourself in Temple Bruer, bring yourself to this building. But I will give you just a word of warning. If you want to go up to the upper floor, that spiral staircase is not for the faint at heart. Leaving Temple Bruer to the west, you'll pass over a bridleway that doesn't look like anything greatly special, but you'd be wrong. This is part of the Great Roman Road, Ermine Street, but as it passes through Temple Bruer, it's little more than a narrow footway. It's one of the lesser known parts of its route. And folks, that's the story of Temple Bruer and the remains of its preceptory. It's not the best known landmark in the world, but it's absolutely fascinating nonetheless. I definitely recommend stopping by here and having a look at this place if you're passing through. From the ancient goings on of the Templars, tomorrow we're changing it up a bit. Next, we're off to one of the biggest RAF villages in the country, where there's still an active airbase and a college to go with it. I'll see you there. Welcome back to North Kesteven again, everybody. Now this is a parish I've been avoiding for quite a while because it's such a complicated one. There's all sorts to tell you about in this. This is actually two parishes that have been merged together. The merge happened just a few years ago now, and it's turned this into quite the complicated place to cover. We'll see what we can do with it. This is Cranwell, Bruer-Cranwell and Bayard's Leap. Cranwell, Bruer-Cranwell and Bayard's Leap, Crane's Dream, Springwell and the Bay Horse's Jump. Today in North Kesteven we come to a parish that I've been looking forward to, but equally also kind of avoiding too. This isn't an easy one to cover. It's not all that long ago that Bruer-Cranwell was its own parish, but thanks to the hive of infinite wisdom that local councils have, today we find ourselves in a merged parish, Cranwell, Bruer-Cranwell and Bayard's Leap. This contains no less than 5 distinct areas, namely the 2 villages of Cranwell and Bruer-Cranwell, the hamlet of Bayard's Leap, a deserted medieval village called Dunsby, and the site of what is perhaps Lincolnshire's second most important airbase, RAF Cranwell. It's all bounded by the A17 to the south and west, whilst the A15 makes its way through it from north to south. RAF Cranwell is by far the centrepiece of this episode, which has not just 1 but 2 airfields. It also has an RAF college. The northern airfield is the older, being used for airships from 1916. It still retains its grass runways for gliders and light aircraft. The southern airfield is much larger, with 2 paved runways. Although first used as a flying training base in 1917, the paved runways didn't come along until 1954, allowing for jet aircraft like the Meteor and the Vampire. A lot of RAF Cranwell is off limits to the public because it's an active airbase. That said, there are some things we can legally see. Most interesting among those is the main guard room, which originated as a railway station. The track, though, has long gone. We'll explain it all as we journey around this amazing area of central North Kesteven. We start our journey around this very varied and complicated parish in the small village of Bruer-Cranwell, just off the A15. This is Bruer-Cranwell's Grade 2 listed Anglican parish church, and it's dedicated to All Saints. No longer used for services, it's now a redundant building. It was built in the 16th century over an earlier church and largely rebuilt in 1857. There's been a church at Braunswell since at least the Saxon period. The oldest feature of All Saints today is a grave slab in the nave that dates from sometime between the 10th and 12th centuries. The church retains its 16th century octagonal font, whilst much of the remainder comes from that 19th century rebuild. The church is nice enough, but don't overlook what you can see from the churchyard here. South of the church is a field known as Home Close. If you examine the field, you can easily see undulations formed by the foundations of buildings that made up a former medieval village, which is now completely covered in turf. In fact, some walls are still visible, standing up to 2 metres high in places. Several collapsed buildings were visible as late as the 19th century, and among them was the former vicarage. Braunswell flourished during the early medieval period and only began a slow decline in the 14th century. The population would only grow again when the church was rebuilt in the 16th century. By the 18th century, only one family lived in Braunswell. A few houses stood in the Victorian period when the church was rebuilt once more. Not surprisingly, given the few families that remain now, the church was declared redundant in 1973 and it's now cared for by the Lincolnshire Churches Trust. Aside from the church, the only other building of note is Braunswell Hall, a late 17th century farmhouse of rubble dressed with ashlar under a tile roof. Well, this churchyard is not the easiest thing to access because you have to come through a gate off the road, which is normal for any usual churchyard, of course, but this gate is a bit tricky. It took me a few minutes to work out how to open this because it's kept shut, as you can see, because there's cattle around. And don't try and open it using this because you won't be able to untie that, it's very tight. Instead, what you have to do is lift the other end off its hinge and then put it back on when you're finished. Braunswell is a former civil parish in its own right, but in April 2011 it was abolished and merged with Cranwell and Byards-Leap to form the current Cranwell, Braunswell and Byards-Leap. It doesn't have any other major landmarks unless you count the large quarry that it sits close to. Around here too are the remains of 2 deserted medieval villages. One of them is of course Braunswell itself, according to definition. The earthwork remains at Home Close attest to that, even though there's now a more modern settlement here. The other one is a place called Dunsby, or as some people know it, Dunsby St Andrews. To get to that, we have to use the A15. Blink and you'll miss this. Dunsby is literally right on the line of the A15 and it's so small you're through it in a flash. Dunsby St Andrew is first documented in the Domesday Book where 2 landholdings are listed. They were of similar size. One belonged to a manor in Quarrington, which was owned by St Benedict of Ramsey Abbey, and the other was a soapland of a manor in Ruskington, which belonged to Geoffrey Alcelin. The name means Duns farmstead or village and is a hybrid of Old English and Old Danish. Much of the land in Dunsby was given to Catley Abbey, Newbow Abbey and Temple Bruer in the late 12th century. In 1563 there were only 5 households in Dunsby and the only substantial structure was Dunsby Hall. By the 19th century there were only 3 cottages left in Dunsby, although it was stated that the foundations of the church and a large mansion may still be seen. They can't today. Tradition places Dunsby's church west of the main road, beneath the present Dunsby House, which was converted from the last pair of cottages. Aerial photographs taken of the area in 1998 show an east to west aligned rectangular crop mark. That appears to be the remains of a building interpreted as a chapel dedicated to St Andrew. Driving through Dunsby is, for sure, something you are better off doing during daylight hours. At night, you might be driving with a rather nasty passenger. This is the tale of the Ruskington Horror. This junction between the A15 and the road to Ruskington is apparently haunted by something truly terrifying. Don't just take my word for that either. Whatever's here made national TV. In 1998 on ITV's This Morning programme, a man called Kevin Whelan described in some detail the experience he had whilst passing through this area at 2 in the morning. As he approached the junction, he spotted something floating in front of him and assumed it was a large white bin bag. Suddenly, a human appeared around the car's front pillar on the top right of the windscreen with the left hand up. He described the face as Greek-looking with dark hair and an olivey green skin. No sooner had he finished telling the story, the ITV switchboard went crazy with callers, ringing in to share similar experiences they'd had at the very same junction. It was enough to convince the producers of This Morning to revisit the story the following day. Several theories were put forward as to what the ghostly apparition was. Theories range from the spirit of a dead motorcyclist, a phantom airman from a World War II bomber that crashed nearby, even to a member of the medieval order of the Knights Templar. It's known there was a plague pit nearby where bodies were buried en masse. Also, a quick look at maps of the area show the deserted medieval settlement of Dunsby, only 250 metres south of the junction, which apparently had a haunted hall. The bottom line is, there is something here, and whatever it is, it comes out at night to terrify unsuspecting drivers. That's why it's called the Ruskington Horror. Okay, the hoodie's come off, it's time for business. Time for our main walk then around Cranwell village. Now you can split Cranwell into two distinct areas. You've got the main village, which is where I am right now, and you've also got RAF Cranwell, which is just a bit further to the west. I'll show you whereabouts it is. You might not be able to see it from here, but up there is the sort of edge of it, sort of beyond this white car, up there. That's for later. Let's deal with the village first, because the village was here a long time before that airbase was. Our walk around Cranwell begins here in a cul-de-sac called the Sidings. The name of this street is a reference to the railway line and station that once served Cranwell. The line is long gone, but if you look at overhead maps of the place, you can still trace its old route. It ran alongside the B1429, passing through the area now covered by this street. The line was a single-track branch built in 1917 to serve a naval aviation training facility. That facility at the time was known as RNAS Daedalus, and it became RAF Cranwell. The branch line was closed in 1956 and the track was removed. Cranwell railway station still exists. Today it's the main guard room at RAF Cranwell. Other buildings, though, have now gone. For example, there was an engine shed and a small goods yard once upon a time, much closer to the village. These were demolished and the land was reused for housing. Housing is certainly not something that modern-day Cranwell is short of. This is a big village. It's a good job then that the place has a few shops to cater for its residents. Here, close to the Sidings, is one of those. It's a Premier shop, which used to be known as D&J News, a Mace store. Let's walk into the centre of Cranwell now via College Road, where there's more. This runs from east to west and is alternatively numbered the B1429. As a surname, Cranwell often occurs in parts of Buckinghamshire and Essex. In both, there's a few small farms and hamlets which carry the name Cranwell, mostly in Buckinghamshire. The name Cranwell is thought to mean spring or stream frequented by cranes or herons. Water sources such as wells and limestone streams are definitely in abundance here. The population of the village in 1801 was recorded as being just 88 people. That's rather ridiculous when you consider the size of it now. Today, Cranwell has a population that stands in the region of 3,000. This incredible growth is hammered home when you look at old OS maps from the early 1900s. On the 1900 map, Cranwell is a tiny village located on a crossroads with only a handful of houses, a church, a school and a few farms. The population in 1911 was only 184. The village's growth and continued expansion is all down to the RAF base and the aviation training facility located away to the west. It all makes sense when you think about it. Cranwell might have exploded in terms of population and increased in size beyond all recognition, but the central crossroads has never altered. It's still here. Okay, here we are then in the centre of Cranwell. There's a lot of things in this centre that are RAF themed, which is understandable considering there's a massive RAF base just to the west of the village. Let's check out some of those. We'll also check out what's on the green over there and also what's in front of the green. You can see there's a cross there. The village centres on the remains of a cross located here where College Road meets Willow Lane and Sleaford Road. This is a 14th century market cross or butter cross from which important matters of public moment were often announced. A scheduled monument, the cross has had a lot of restoration work since it was first placed here. Most of that was carried out by a Mr. C.H. Fowler between 1903 and 1904. Also in the centre of the village, Cranwell has a couple of businesses. Here we have the Willows Country Store, which until last year doubled as the post office. With the resignation of its postmaster, who cited reasons including tripling electricity bills and a lack of custom through online postage options, Cranwell Village now has no postal service. There is, however, a post office on the RAF base. We'll see where that is when we reach that later in the video. The shop's owners still run the premises next door. This is the Willows Tea Room, which is open from 9 until 3 every day, except Sundays, although they can cater for private functions on Sundays too, according to their Facebook page. If the cross isn't a good enough marker for the centre of the village, how about this green? This beautiful patch of land has been here for centuries and it's magnificent. We can cross the green on a short footpath and it will take us towards the church, which originated in the 10th century. So there is a certain military theme to this green. If you take a look at this bench, for example, this shows you in knitted form some of the things we're expecting to see later. You can see there we've got a soldier, there's a Navy seaman at the back there, there's a plane, because obviously RAF, and of course the poppies are all around this green too. There's a couple on this bench, there's a few more over here. This is obviously where the Christmas tree goes every year, and it's still there actually. Still there. It's the end of May and the Christmas tree is still there. So there you go. Now this was decorated with some other knitting. Just stick around here a little bit. There you go. Obviously for VE Day, VE80 in front of the Christmas tree there. It's quite nice. And there's a few other bits and bobs that have got poppies on them. These bollards over here, for example. And if you go up there beyond that tree, you're then into the churchyard. Let's check that out next. The church is located just behind the cross at the centre of the village. Dedicated to St Andrew, this is one of the oldest churches in Lincolnshire. The date makes a bit of sense. Cranwell as a village possibly dates from the time of King Alfred between 849 and 899 AD. The church consists only of a nave and a chancel and a small bellcote. Much of the masonry is Norman, but parts do date back to Saxon times. The fittings include 17th century bench ends and a perpendicular rood screen. Mounted on corbels in the north aisle are the remains of a hogsback grave. The porch's stonework is also pretty interesting. In it you can see the incised outline of a pilgrim's shoe and the year 1728. On the right hand door pillar are 6 carved figures. They're believed to depict the ancient May King and Queen ceremonial costumes. Seeing as we're in a village that's heavily linked to the RAF, it'll come as no surprise, I'd imagine, to learn that the churchyard has a huge number of war graves. Cranwell's churchyard is defined as a Commonwealth War Graves Commission cemetery. It has a total of 131 graves from both the First and the Second World Wars. Next we have a short amble around the northeastern sections of the village. This housing estate we're in right now simply wasn't here a century ago. This was instead lush green farmland. Cranwell's expansion was rapid, and this is the result. When the military came along, it didn't take long for houses to appear alongside. As we know, that's a normal occurrence in these villages. Anchoring this estate is De Gaunt Drive. The De Gaunt family are pretty important to Cranwell's history. St Andrew's Church was likely extended by Gilbert de Gaunt, with the addition of a north aisle at some point, which is separated from the nave by its Norman arches. Let's make our way through these streets and we'll reconvene in the centre of the village again shortly as we head for the village hall, the sports ground and the old school. Now Cranwell has a similar area to the one we've just walked around on the other side of the playing field, which you can find down Old School Lane. So let's go down here and check out what's along here, shall we? This street is called Old School Lane. Cranwell Village has no school of its own today, but there is still a school in the parish. It's located on the RAF base. As early as 1682, there was a charity that provided for the education of the poor in Cranwell, but the first true school here was built in 1850. Constructed using funds raised by public subscription, it provided facilities for up to 35 children. It was located here on Old School Lane, and this is the building in question. There are no secondary schools in the village. Older children instead travel to Lincoln, Grantham or Sleaford for that stage of their education. Next up, and still on Old School Lane, is Cranwell Village Hall. It sits by the side of the recreational facilities the village possesses. The building is owned by the parish council. The village hall was built on a piece of land that was donated by the Bristow family as a memorial to their family. Many local groups and organisations use it regularly throughout the week, and it's also the usual venue for the monthly meetings of the parish council, although the parish council office is the old school building over the road, so that's sometimes used too. It makes an ideal venue for most events such as weddings, parties, dances, business seminars and meetings, as well as your average social gatherings. It's fully equipped for up to 150 people. Now importantly, Cranwell does not have a public house. It's one of the few things a village of this size really should have, but sadly lacks. However, it does have a members-only social club. Located at the side of the village hall, it dates back to when cadets training at RAF Cranwell during World War II used to come into the village to try and buy alcohol. The members-only club was introduced as a deterrent to them, and being only temporary residents in the area, they were unable to gain membership. To this day, no pub has ever opened its doors to the public in the village, even though the reasons for not having one have long since become obsolete. Okay, onto the playing field then. I describe this one as modest. It's certainly not the largest playing field in the world, but it's still a vital amenity for people here in Cranwell. So here we have the playing fields. These feature the likes of tennis courts, a football pitch, a bowling green and a pretty cool children's play area. Football-wise, Cranwell JFC are a local junior football club founded in 1989 by a Mr. Peterkin. His goal was to create a place where all children could play football regardless of their ability. He therefore grew the club with a focus on fairness and opportunity. Cranwell JFC is now a thriving club that continue to uphold those values. It's also important to note that there's a second football team affiliated with the college at RAF Cranwell. It's known as RAFC Cranwell. Okay, so now we're back in the residential areas again. This street is called Thorold Avenue. The Thorold family once held Cranwell Manor. They would occupy Cranwell from the 16th century for over 300 years. Their manor house was demolished in 1816 and Hall Farms farmhouse was erected on the site. In 1871, Sir John Thorold is recorded as owning all of the land in Cranwell with the exception of the church gleblands and a single farmstead. The latter was supposedly under the ownership of St John's College, Cambridge. The Thorolds would eventually move away to Syston Park. They did leave a legacy here though. In 1682, Sir William and his wife Lady Anne Thorold established a charity that gave £8 and 2 shillings per year to the poor to be distributed on New Year's Day. The parish also benefited from the will of Lady Margaret Thorold, who granted £15 a year to apprentice 4 boys from the village. Okay, we are back to the start, but we are not finished with this place just yet. This might be the edge of the village, but there's still the RAF base to cover. Come with me and let's see what we can make of it. RAF Cranwell is an active station, unlike many former Lincolnshire air bases we've encountered. Since January 2025, it's been managed by Wing Commander Matthew Chocker Thornton. The history of military aviation at Cranwell goes back to November 1915, when the Admiralty requisitioned 2,500 acres of land from the Marquis of Bristol's estate. It's fair to say that since then, this part of Cranwell has seen loads of changes, and the story of how it's developed into the modern airbase is very complicated. RAF Cranwell today is primarily an air training facility. Among other functions, it's here where the Royal Air Force College, or RAFC for short, trains the RAF's new officers and aircrew. Its motto is Altium Altrix, which is Latin and means nurture the highest. That appears above the main doors of the officers' mess. The RAF's Officer and Aircrew Selection Centre is based here, where all applicants to the RAF are put through a rigorous selection process. RAF Cranwell has also been the headquarters of the Central Flying School since 1995, when that moved from RAF Scampton. Number 3 Flying Training School also provide elementary training for fixed-wing and multi-engine student pilots from the RAF and the Fleet Air Arm. And since the mid-1990s, Cranwell has also housed the headquarters of the Air Cadets and the Air Cadet Organisation's adult training facility. Now obviously we won't be able to see all of this, but we can see bits from this main road. This shop, for example, is fair game. This is where the only post office can be found in the parish these days. This reminds me a little bit of when we covered Strensall Barracks in York. Do you remember that episode? Where one side of the road was all housing, residential, and the other side was well and truly off limits, MOD land. It's exactly the same here in Cranwell. Over here you can see we've got some of the residences which flank the base, and then if I turn the camera around, there's a line of trees, and behind that line of trees there's quite a high fence with barbed wire on top and big signs that say you cannot go in there. Absolutely right, you can't. We can still see bits of it though, so we'll continue up the road. This is a public road, so you know I've got every right to be here, so we'll see what else we can find. This here is the entrance to Cranwell's modern primary school, which replaced the one on Old School Lane in the village itself. Housed in a modern building, this has approximately 300 children on its roll between the ages of 4 and 11. This is a foundation school and it's non-denominational. Maybe unknown to most people, Cranwell actually has 2 airfields. Better known is the main one, which you can see from the A17, but there's a second one too. The northern airfield, made of grass, is the older. It was used for light aircraft and airships from 1916 onwards, and is still in use today for similar aircraft. It's used regularly by gliders. This building here is the base of Cranwell's Gliding Club, who use that northern airfield today. Of course, the southern airfield is the much larger, with 2 paved runways. It abuts the A17 and was first used as a flying training base in 1917. Its paved runways were built in 1954 so that it could accommodate jet aircraft. Such planes included the likes of the Meteor and the Vampire. This building is the main guard room. In 1917, when that former branch line railway was built to serve the base, this was the station. The train that served the base was known as the Cranwell Flyer. It's kind of hard to believe that was a railway station at one point, to be honest with you, but apparently it was. The main guard room was the station that served the old Royal Navy base before it became RAF Cranwell. Now, there is a few other things to see before we reach the college, which is at the other end of this road. There's this building here next. This is a community centre. Next we come to the Brunei Community Centre, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can think of this as the village hall that serves those who live on the RAF camp. This contains the Hive, which is the main communal centre, as well as a coffee shop which is open to all, not just those that live on the base. RAF Cranwell has several churches, but there's only one we can see properly here. That would be St Andrew's Church, which shares its dedication with the one in the village. There are two others on the RAF base. Namely, they are St Michael and All Angels Church and St Peter's Catholic Church, the latter of which is tied to the RAF College. Just up the road from St Andrews there are two planes. These are known as Gate Guardians. One of them is a Jet Provost, the other is a Hawker Siddeley Dominie. Of the two, it's the Provost that's probably more relevant to Cranwell's history. The Jet Provost played a significant role in the operations of the RAF College here. It served as the primary training aircraft in the 1960s until its replacement by the Short Staccato in 1991. Incidentally, the Jet Provost was the first jet trainer aircraft in the world to enter service. RAF Cranwell received its first Jet Provost Mark III on March 2, 1962. The college also used Provost T4s and Mark Vs, with the latter replacing the T4s. During the mid-1970s, the RAFC began to equip its Jet Provost fleet with modified T3A and T5A versions. The aircraft was used extensively by the college's aerobatics team, called the Poachers. This one on display here is one of the T5As. It was selected to be the new station gate guard at Cranwell after the type's retirement and is still on display to this day. As for the Hawker Siddeley Dominie, this was the RAF's advanced navigation trainer, used to train rear crew for fast jets. It's been in service since 1965 and was operated by No. 55 Reserve Squadron. The Dominie was a military derivative of the HS-125 business jet. It was the first jet-powered navigation trainer designed specifically for such a purpose in the RAF, according to various museum collections. It was retired from service in January 2011 after over 45 years of service. One of them now resides here, and you can find a second one at the Cosford Aerospace Museum. Well, let me tell you folks, this is a long old walk up this road. I've been walking for quite a long way. It's a dead straight road that runs right through RAF Cranwell, and it just seems never ending. But the end is in sight, because behind me up there is the main college building, and this is the thing I think most people here have been waiting to see. Now we come to the RAF College building, which occupies the northwestern part of the airbase. This is an academy which provides training to all personnel preparing to become commissioned officers. The college also provides initial training to aircrew cadets and is responsible for all RAF recruiting, along with officer and aircrew selection. It is, in a broad sense, the RAF's equivalent of the Royal Navy's Britannia Royal Naval College and the British Army's Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. It was originally established as a naval aviation training centre during World War I after the Royal Naval Air Service had broken away from the Royal Flying Corps. Commodore Godfrey Payne was sent to Cranwell to start a naval flying training school so that the Navy would no longer need to make use of the Central Flying School. It opened in 1916 at Cranwell under Payne's leadership. In 1917, Payne was succeeded by Commodore John Luce. Because the naval personnel trained here were held on the books of HMS Daedalus, a ship that was moored on the River Medway in Kent, the college was known to some as RNAS Daedalus. In 1918, the RAF was established and Brigadier General Harold Briggs took over the running of the college, and Cranwell became the HQ of No. 12 Squadron for the last few months of the war. After hostilities ceased in 1918, Cranwell was re-established as an air academy which would provide basic flying training. The college became, therefore, the world's first air academy in 1919. Prior to its founding, RAF cadets had been trained by the Cadet Brigade based at Hastings in Sussex under the command of Brigadier General Alfred Critchley. Because the RAF tended to recruit its officers from public schools, just 14% of officer cadets at Cranwell between 1934 and 1939 came from grammar or state schools. The main college building was erected between 1929 and 1933. prior to its construction, training took place in old naval huts. After some disagreement between Sir Samuel Hoare and the college's architect James West, the building plans were drawn up in the mid-1920s. They incorporated design aspects of Christopher Wren's Royal Hospital at Chelsea. Lady Maud Hoare laid the foundation stone in 1929. By 1933, the building was completed. In front of the hall, orange gravel paths lead around a roughly circular grass area. This is known, thanks to the colour, as the Orange. The college building has Grade 2 listed status and became the main location for RAF officer training when the Prince of Wales officially opened it in October 1934. During World War II, it was closed. Reopening after the war, the college would absorb the Royal Air Force Technical College in the 1960s. A new academic building was opened in 1962 by Sir Frank Whittle, who had attended Cranwell as a young officer and had invented the turbojet engine here. It was known as Whittle Hall in his honour. Cranwell has had many famous graduates. Perhaps the one that sticks out the most is King Charles III, who underwent training as a jet pilot here at Cranwell. After the college building, the road begins to run off into the countryside and towards the A17, but we haven't seen everything. It's impossible to film anything else due to this being a military base. Other off-limits stuff include the RAF Centre of Aviation Medicine. Consisting of 3 wings, it's currently undergoing a relocation from RAF Henlow to RAF Cranwell, which will be complete by 2026. The equipment being relocated includes aircraft cockpit rigs and hyperbaric chambers, which simulate the effect of high altitude on the body. RAF Cranwell even has its very own golf course, also off-limits to us. It's a place for RAF personnel to enjoy golfing, although it too is also used for training and coaching. The RAF Central Fund also provide golfing opportunities for personnel. Additionally, there are other golf courses and clubs across Lincolnshire that RAF Cranwell personnel can access. Okay, so to get back to the start, rather than just walk all the way back down to where I parked, I figured I would come through some of the residential areas just to show you what they're like. This is Delhi Square with a very nice green in the centre of it, and we'll walk around here back to where I parked on Flowerdown Avenue, and that is our route then back to the car. Now, of course, we haven't yet seen the airfield itself. We've seen some bits of RAF Cranwell, we've seen the college building, we've seen a fair few other bits and bobs, haven't we? We haven't actually seen the airfield itself. Now, thanks to my good buddy and long-time subscriber Mike Reed, I know some places where I can see the airfield perfectly legally. Most of them are off the A17, so we'll explore those towards the end of this video. But of course, we're still not fully around this parish yet. We've seen Cranwell, we've seen RAF Cranwell, and we've seen Bruer-Cranwell as well. However, there is the small matter of Bayard's Leap to cover. So let's drive down to that now and tell the tale behind the name. With RAF Cranwell behind us, we only have one more thing to cover. We've seen Cranwell and Bruer-Cranwell and a whole lot more besides, but we still have to talk about Bayard's Leap. Bayard's Leap today is a small hamlet that sits on the A17. It's got a handful of houses, a cafe and a campsite, and that's about it. What makes it interesting though is its name. The hamlet is linked with various legends. Bayard's Leap is associated with the activities of the Knights Templar, who perhaps held tournaments and jousts on the site. After all, it did lie at the southern end of their military training ground, overseen by the preceptory at Temple Brewer. The name Bayard's Leap is actually related to horses. The story goes there was a witch called Old Meg, an evil crone who plagued the local villagers from a cave in a spinney near the Roman Ermine Street. As a bane of the countryside, her witchcraft would cause crops to wither, not ideal for local farmers who decided to take some action. They would muster a local champion, a retired soldier. He came forward in response to the farmer's plight and claimed he could kill Old Meg by driving a sword through her heart. He needed to select a horse suitable for this task, and so he went to a pond where they would usually drink. He dropped a stone in the pond and selected the horse that reacted quickest. Even though it might have been a bad choice perhaps, the horse he would eventually pick was blind. The beast would therefore be known locally as Blind Bayard. The champion went to the witch's cave and called her out, but the witch refused, saying she was eating and he'd have to wait. However, unbeknown to our intrepid hero, Old Meg was bluffing and crept up behind him, sinking her long nails into Blind Bayard. This caused the horse to leap over 60 feet into the air, which is where the name Bayard's Leap comes from. The champion, though, would eventually regain control of the horse. He rode towards the pond and Old Meg gave chase. When they reached the pond, he turned and thrust his sword into her heart, causing her to fall into it and drown. Another version of the tale is slightly different. It says that Old Meg responded to the champion not by telling him to wait, but with her own offensive. This, so the alternative legend says, was by rushing at her adversary, spitting fire in his face and releasing a blood-curdling shriek that could be heard all over the heath. Although it agrees Bayard's leap was thanks to her long nails, it also says there was no chase. Instead, the jump caused the old witch to lose her grip and fall off. Before being able to recover, and without a moment's hesitation, the champion would deliver his fatal blow on the spot. There are yet more versions of this tale, and they all have wildly differing accounts of what happened. The only constant is how Bayard came to jump so high. Those nails must have been sharp. And so this is the spot where Blind Bayard supposedly landed after jumping into the air thanks to Old Meg. It's marked by 4 posts in the ground with horseshoes as well as a commemorative stone. This sharply cut small valley in the local limestone, which has now been smoothed over somewhat by ploughing, is as likely a site as any for these dramatic events, assuming they actually happened. The horseshoes give their name to the cafe which you can find at Bayard's Leap today. I wonder how many people travelling on the A17 know of this amazing tale when they stop here. And even this information board has got a different version of the tale as well. If you read it, it says, "This is the site of a famous Lincolnshire legend. The name Bayard's Leap derives from the name of the horse in the tale. He was a bay horse called Bayard or Bayard. The story has it that a witch lived nearby and a villager from Ancaster was appointed to kill her. He used his horse Bayard. He mounted the horse on the mounting stone by the farm gates on the other side of the now B6403. The horse took 3 huge leaps and the witch and the horse vanished. The horseshoes here and the other set in the small wood mark the horse's huge strides." So you can see how legends have different versions. There's quite a few of this here at Bayard's Leap. So here we go then. This is the area where I've chosen to get a good view of the runways here at RAF Cranwell. I believe the map Mike sent me had 7 points where you could stop along the A17. This is just one of them. There's a couple of others. I think there's a couple down there somewhere. There might even be a couple this way. But this one seems to be the best one, I reckon. You can get a good view of the entire airfield here. Just walk across the grass a little bit towards the A17. You're perfectly alright to do this just here because public road, obviously, nothing wrong with this. And I imagine plane spotters come here all the time. Now, I don't know whether or not there's any activity on the airfield this morning. I have heard a couple of planes up in the sky, but whether or not they came from Cranwell, I don't know. But there you have it. There you have the runways, the airfield if you like, the southern airfield. In fact, there's a plane just about to come above us here. I don't know whether you can see it. That's probably taken off from Cranwell. Can you see it? It's quite high up. And there's another one behind it. This one's definitely taken off from Cranwell. I've just seen it's just come up into the sky. So we have got a bit of activity here this morning. It's a Saturday morning as well. According to Mike, you don't usually find this on a Saturday morning. But apparently today we do. There you go. Awesome stuff. Right, that'll do us for Cranwell-Roxholm-Leasingham and Bardsley. Well, that was quite the adventure, I'm sure you'll agree. That is one of the most complicated and downright ridiculous parishes in Lincolnshire, but wasn't it awesome? Tomorrow we're off to one that's nowhere near as problematic. In fact, it's one of those that really barely exists. Join me there and we'll see what we can uncover. Welcome back to North Kesteven again, everybody. Now today I've got one of those episodes that I'm going to be through in a flash, and there's not really much to film either. This one's all about what you can't see as opposed to what you can see. Let's see what happens. This is Wroxham. Wroxham, Hrox Homestead. Today in North Kesteven we're covering the smallest parish that remains in this district, and it's one of those that's truly blink and you'll miss it. Not many people even know of the existence of Wroxham, but being fair, that's probably more to do with the nearby villages of Cranwell and Leasingham than it is with Wroxham itself. This is essentially a deserted medieval village, the sort of settlement which I would cover in about 2 minutes if it was within a larger parish. However, Wroxham has been its own parish for a long time. Alternatively spelt and pronounced as Wroxham, this was mentioned in the Domesday Book. It belonged to Alfred of Lincoln and Geoffrey Alslin and had a population of 8 people. Its name is Old English and means Hrox homestead or estate. It grew to be fairly substantial with a population of 49 families by the early 19th century. That gave it a total population of 139 in 1871, which was its peak. The medieval village is no longer around, and what you see in Wroxham today is the modern version, built over part of its former site. A few faint traces of earthworks that represent possible late medieval crofts can be seen to the south of Old Hall Farm. Wroxham Hall is probably the only landmark of note in the place these days. It's made of bleak stock brick and is said to be dated 1874, although the north wing originated in the 18th century. It once commanded a small parkland with some formal gardens and some extensive views over the surrounding area. The hall is still here, so let's check it out and see if Wroxham holds anything else of interest. Okay, so we've driven into Wroxham off the A15 and we've ended up on this road right here, which is quite narrow and it's got lots of speed bumps in it. Now I'm going to be really quick here because this is a single track road and I'm actually parked up here in one of the passing places, so I need to get a move on. There's nobody around at the moment, so I should be alright for a few minutes, but I don't want to stay here for too long. Now the reason I've stopped here is because I'm interested in this field right here, because the main sort of settlement of Wroxham is kind of over there and down there, but this field holds a few secrets to its past, I suppose. So aside from the A15, which cuts across the southwestern portion of the land Wroxham covers, you have just 2 roads you can otherwise use. You can enter Wroxham from either road, but you're much better off using this one off the A15 because the one to the east is a rough, bumpy track. There is another advantage to using this lane though. To your left as you drive in are some medieval remains. These aren't the best preserved earthworks you will ever see, but they are still noticeable. Wroxham was never a massive village in medieval times, but it definitely had more of a presence than it has today. These faint earthworks represent part of the village, the rest has been built upon by more modern structures. One of them is Wroxham Hall. Also, these earthworks aren't the only ones you can find in the village. There's a few more to the south of Old Hall Farm. So now we've defined how the place is laid out, let's go and see its biggest landmark, Wroxham Hall. Originally a country mansion built of bleak stock brick, Wroxham Hall was built in 1874. It was the residence and property of John Albert Cole before in 1911 being lived in by a Mrs. Bourne. The hall has always been surrounded by extensive grounds, and so it remains today. It was once the manor house of the Wroxham estate. Within the grounds is a secret garden containing a fountain and a patio. That would have been the hall's formal garden back in the 1870s. In more modern times, the house has been extended, refurbished and redecorated to provide a cosy and comfortable surrounding for all of its current residents. Today, you see, the hall is a residential care home dedicated to the needs of older people as well as those that need specialist dementia care. It has 39 beds. It also features 3 self-contained apartments that offer its residents a degree of independence whilst remaining within a safe and secure environment. Every month, the home holds an event, which may be a party, a show from a visiting entertainer, or a performance from a visiting musician. These help keep the residents entertained. So that's Wroxham Hall, but don't be fooled thinking that's the only thing here. It's not. Next I'm going to take you to a different part of Wroxham where there's a different landmark entirely. So although we already know the other way into and out of Wroxham is a little tough to conquer in a vehicle, I opted to drive it anyway. By using this road I was able to get to where I needed to be in the next one much more easily than by reusing the other road. It also means you get to see the rest of Wroxham Village, if you can call it that. There is another reason why I've come down here after all. We're now on the minor road that passes Wroxham Hall to the east, and on it there's a former Methodist chapel. This was Wesleyan originally. It was built in 1871 and closed in 2005. Although it's now disused, the burial ground which is attached to it is still in use. The chapel was built by the Cole family of Wroxham Hall and became part of Sleaford's Wesleyan circuit in 1875. It was primarily for the workers of the estate at Wroxham because, as we learned back in Temple Brewer, even farmhands needed somewhere to go to church. The building was designed by a Mr. Whitaker of Dorrington. On opening, its inauguration was celebrated by a public tea, attended by 180 people. The craziest thing about that is the number is more than the population's greatest ever peak. I guess the Coles had a lot of workers. So obviously this is the chapel's cemetery. The chapel itself is off limits to the public these days because it's a privately owned property, but you can still bring yourself into this cemetery. It's a nice little quiet spot actually, secluded by some quite tall hedgerows, so you're quite private as well. And it's just a nice place for a bit of peaceful reflection, shall we say. It's lovely. That's really all there is to Wroxham. That's a really, really small place, isn't it? But we've still got another one to go to yet here in North Kesteven that's much bigger. It's literally just down the road. Follow me. Alright, so with Wroxham behind us, we've only got one village left in North Kesteven. It's a much bigger one and shares its parish council with Wroxham. See you there, everyone. Hello everybody, welcome back to North Kesteven for not the final time, but the final time will be in a village because the last two are towns. Now behind me there we have one of the most impressive landmarks in this place. That's got a connection to the Bishop of Nottingham. I wonder what that could be. Let's find out as we walk around Leasingham. Leasingham, Leofsage's village. We have 3 to go in North Kesteven. 2 of them are towns, the other is the one remaining village, and today we're in that. Welcome everyone to Leasingham, which is grouped together with the tiny settlement of Wroxham for administrative purposes. This is a lot bigger than Wroxham, commanding a population that's a long way north of 1,500 people. Leasingham lies on the B1209, which passes through the village to join the A153 further east, which cuts across Leasingham Moor. The A15 used to run through the village via Captain's Hill until the 1950s, but it was rerouted, forming the Leasingham bypass. Captain's Hill is probably the most interesting of all when it comes to Leasingham streets. It takes its name from a former local landowner, Captain Richard Wharton Middleton, who was an ensign at the Battle of Waterloo. He lived in the early 19th century Leasingham Hall, which is one of the few Grade 2 listed buildings on offer to us here. In 2022 the hall was renovated, transforming it into 6 flats. Other buildings in the village include the Church of St Andrew, a Wesleyan chapel, a manor house, a village hall and a row of almshouses. The local school is St Andrew's C of E, which partners with Carr's Grammar School in Sleaford using its outreach programme. Leasingham can also boast a playing field that includes a football pitch and a bowls club, and there's also one pub in the village too, the Duke of Wellington. Complementing everything amenities wise, there are 2 general shops, a post office, a farm shop and 2 hairdressers. It all makes for a good walk, so let's go and explore the final village in North Kesteven. Let's get things started by making our way across Leasingham Moor, a vast area of agricultural land to the east of the village. Now we can do this pretty easily and relatively safely these days, barring any maniac drivers using the road of course. At one time, crossing this would have been very risky. During the Tudor period, Leasingham Moor was alternatively known as Leasingham Heath, and it gained a reputation as the haunt of highwaymen. It was a brave traveller indeed who made his way across the barren heath in those days. Luckily, nobody's going to hold us up like that now, so let's head on into Leasingham itself. To get this walk started, we're on Bishop's Road. It's just one of the many residential streets that define the northern end of Leasingham. The name, Bishop's Road, is important too. As we journey around the place, you'll see how and why. For the here and now, it's just a pleasant amble through some modern housing. This estate is typical of what happened in Leasingham over the past few decades. It can be defined as an expanding village, 2 miles from Sleaford and 2 miles from Cranwell. The biggest surge in the population of the village occurred between 1961 and 1981, when it rose from 574 to 1,560. As late as 1938, the village had just 37 houses, but today it has 737. That's a really big increase. Some of the oldest buildings, though, do still stand. There are houses dating back to the 1700s, some very well preserved with original windows, doors and latches. Leasingham is a village with a wide range of architecture actually. Like all villages, it has over the years acquired more and more estates to house an ever expanding population. With that expansion has come a range of facilities. Although the name Leasingham means a village situated amidst pastures and meadows, it's not now very rural at all, having very few privately owned farms. Houses seem to have taken the place of old stockyards and old cattle sheds, although the outer boundaries are still surrounded by lush farmland. In one particular area of the village, residents regularly see pheasants, owls and plenty of the usual bird life, but the bleating of sheep and the lowing of cattle is no longer heard here. On the Sleaford side of the village is an area known as the Rookery, where rooks have built their nests for years. Legend says that the nearer the birds build to the top of the tree, the better the summer will be. Several chestnut trees with their white candles in the spring have in the autumn supplied generations of children in Leasingham with conkers. Yeah, a nice early morning stroll there through the housing estate. Who says it's boring doing something like that? I find it quite cathartic, actually. Anyway, after walking down Bishop's Road, we now find ourselves at the first major landmark here in Leasingham, under the shade of this tree. You can see the village hall. Our first major landmark is the village hall, where Chapel Lane meets the Lee. Leasingham has been fortunate in having a community building since 1912. That's when the Leasingham Reading Room was opened after the generosity of one Laura Jessup, who at the time lived in Leasingham Hall. Jessup donated funds to build a meeting place for villagers, and the reading room was the result. It was a wooden building, and although it didn't last long, it served the village well until 1957. It was then replaced by a brick-built village hall. It stood here on a piece of land donated by a local resident called John Banks. He was known to most people as Lom. That hall was the hub of village life for the next 40 years and is remembered fondly by the people of Leasingham. It was a meeting room and a venue for regular groups such as the WI, bingo nights and brownies. The annual pantomime and village fete became traditions at it and were highlights every year. In honour of Laura Jessup, the hall had a room called the Jessup Room, where for a number of years the village playgroup met daily. During the 1990s, the hall was in need of repair or renovation, and funds were raised for a completely new building. Awards were gained from the National Lottery's Charity Board, North Kesteven District Council, the Countryside Agency, Lincolnshire County Council and Leasingham Parish Council. This village hall was opened by John Banks's great-granddaughter Chloe on the 4th of December 1999. It's run by a management committee of dedicated volunteers who all live in the village. Leasingham only has one pub, and this would be it. It's called the Duke of Wellington, and when it was built it began as a thatched inn named the Sun. In the early 19th century it was purchased by a military captain who renamed it the Duke of Wellington following his victory at the Battle of Waterloo. More on him in a bit. The Duke of Wellington is what's known as a community pub these days. In November 2017, Enterprise Inns put the pub's freehold on the market, and this started the clock ticking for the village to buy it. Volunteers came together to form a committee called the Leasingham Community Benefit Society, who would raise the necessary funds. A share purchase scheme was then offered to the wider community. With the help of the Plunkett Foundation and Key Fund, the village was able to purchase the Duke. Now run as a community venture, the Duke of Wellington is owned by not just one or two people, but a staggering 526 investors. That's more than a third of the village. Well, let me tell you folks, there are some cracking buildings here in Leasingham. There's a good example. You'll find that one just down the hill from the Duke of Wellington pub. There's another one behind the camera. We'll see that in a moment. First of all, we're going to head down Spring Lane, right here, and this will take us to the playing field. Right, our next job is to head down Spring Lane, and that will take us to the sports ground. Leasingham does pretty well for itself as far as sporting facilities go. The playing fields include a football pitch as well as a top quality bowling green. Complementing it all is a small playground. Also within the sports ground complex is the Busy Bees Early Years and Nature Centre, which offers children the chance to connect with the natural world around them through various activities. Football wise, that's been played on these grounds since at least the mid-1990s, if not before. Leasingham Junior Football Club was formed in 1994. It's always been known as a friendly club where players of all abilities come together to enjoy the game, but also get fit and develop their skills. The club currently has teams playing in the Mid-Links Youth Football League and prides themselves on development rather than winning at all costs. The club currently runs teams playing at under 10, under 11, under 12, under 15 and under 16 level. Players train on Saturday mornings and the team play matches across the county on Sundays. Now we're back onto Lincoln Road and we're heading for the school. Between there and here though is a row of houses that's well worth a mention. These are known as the Bishop's Almshouses. They were erected by Edward Trollope, Rector of Leasingham and Bishop of Nottingham between 1876 and 1884. They were mainly for poor widows of the parish. Currently the accommodation comprises 3 adjoining ground floor flats, 2 of which are occupied by a single resident each. Okay, just beyond the almshouses there, you have Leasingham's primary school, hiding away there behind that tree. Let's talk about this next. So here we have St Andrew's Primary School. As well as providing a place for educating the children of Leasingham, this is also the base for the local scout group. Now it's important to note that the school as you see it today is a heck of a lot bigger than it once was. If you look on old OS maps of the village, you will only ever see one school in Leasingham. It's always been right here. However, it's expanded a lot since it first opened. On the 1887 and 1905 OS maps of Leasingham, the school building is marked as a single range with several small porches or lean-to extensions. That structure was built in 1849 by Charles Wynne, with contributions from both the rector and the lady of the manor. The rector had it enlarged in 1872 when it was attended by 50 pupils. At some point thereafter, the building was demolished and replaced by a brand new 20th century school. It's not clear if that's the current school, but regardless, it still occupies the same site. The Scout group is held in St Andrew's Primary School's main hall. The group is run by a selection of leaders and young leaders split into Beavers, Cubs and Scouts. The Necker colours are red and blue. The Scout group take part in both an annual remembrance service in the village and the St George's Day Parade in Sleaford. Next we come to the church, and it's dedicated to St Andrew. The origins of this church are a little uncertain, but records can give us a little clue. They show that an independent chapel was founded at Wroxham in Leasingham in the 12th century, but whether that chapel was built on the same site as this is not clear. Curiously, there was no mention of a church in the Domesday Book, so we can assume that there was never a Saxon church here. Regardless, the current building consists of a 13th century tower and a nave with a 15th century vestry and a heavily restored chancel. The west doorway of the tower dates to around 1200, and there are reused fragments of 12th century stonework that show traditional Norman chevron decoration in the vestry and the nave. This is a building of primarily stone in a combination of early English and a few later styles, the most notable being the decorated brooch spire, relieved by 3 tiers of spire lights. Inside, its font has a base and stem of early English date, whilst the bowl appears to be a rude copy by a local mason of an ancient font. In front of the south pier of the chancel arch is a marble slab inscribed to Charles Medlicott, and the armorial bearings of the Fletwick family appear in one of the windows. In 1863, the church was thoroughly restored, and the chancel, which had wholly disappeared at that point, was rebuilt. The floors were relaid, and a new pulpit and other fittings were introduced. Okay, so we've got a cross here in the churchyard, which I'll just show you here. There we go, there is said cross. Now I've no idea what this one's for, but it has some interesting shields at the bottom here. I don't know what they're all about. And there's also some pretty blue wreaths here too. Now this is definitely not the war memorial, because that is just outside the gates. Just there. That's next. Back onto the road again, and in front of the church is the war memorial. This one is a 3-stepped concrete base surmounted by a plinth, a tall shaft and a cavalry cross. There are 19 names listed on this one. 12 of them were local men who died in World War I, and the remaining 7 were casualties of World War II. Now, the main road through the village is an interesting one. This used to be the route of the A15 before it was diverted to form the Leasingham bypass, which now skirts the village to the west. Today, the road through the village has been downgraded and doesn't carry a road number. It's just named various things along its length. This section of it is called Captain's Hill. It's named in honour of Captain Richard Wharton Middleton, who served at the Battle of Waterloo. He lived at the Grade 2 listed Leasingham Hall, built in 1836, which is next on our list at the top of the hill. Leasingham Hall is a small country house essentially, although these days it's no longer lived in by just one family. It's been converted into 6 flats. The building you see here does date from 1836, and several sources do confirm that. However, the house has been here longer than that. The original was 17th century. After being added to in the 18th century, it was remodelled in 1836 following a fire, giving us the hall you see today. It's constructed of both limestone rubble and brick with ashlar dressings, and it sports a 20th century slate roof. Also of note are the Georgian gate piers, and by them is a box tree inscribed with the words, "This boxwood grew in the garden of Hocomont during the Battle of Waterloo, 18th of June, 1815. Of course, Captain Richard wasn't the only notable person to live here. As we know already, it was once lived in by Laura Jessup. Jessup was the eldest daughter of Charles Sharp, who in turn was a wealthy corn merchant and the owner of Sharp Seeds. Laura Jessup's husband was Augustus Leverton Jessup, and the pair lived in Leasingham Hall from 1890 until 1912. That's when they would move to Lexham Hall at Mitford in Norfolk. See, I told you there were some nice buildings in Leasingham, and Leasingham Hall is fantastic. There's another house though that's literally just across the road from that also could be described as fantastic. Right there, that is the manor house. Now, as nice as Leasingham Hall is, it's by no means the oldest residential property the place has. Much older is Leasingham Manor, built in around 1550 on the foundations of a medieval house. In the 17th century, it was rumoured that its owner, Sir William York, was involved in witchcraft. I wonder how many of the locals dabble in that these days. In the mid-18th century, the house was remodelled in a Georgian style by Sir Richard and Lady Anne Cust. Its grand south front is hidden from the street, but it has 5 bays and 2 storeys with rusticated quoins and a panelled parapet. Its doorcase has some Doric pilasters. The Manor House lends its name to this row of shops you can find close by. These are the Manor Farm shops, and they're both a culinary and horticultural haven. Manor Farm shops are a cherished chapter in the village's story. Established in 1964, they've been a family-run business for generations, intertwining with the fabric of Leasingham's rural life. They all pride themselves on offering an array of locally sourced produce. Here's a rundown of the shops you can find here. Manor Farm shop itself is the main one. As you step inside, the air is fragrant with the earthy scent of fresh fruits and vegetables. Here, the seasons dictate the offerings. Manor Farm Blooms is a florist, offering beautiful seasonal flowers and ready-made bouquets, whatever the occasion. The butcher's counter is adjacent to the main farm shop. They're renowned for their award-winning Lincolnshire sausage and homemade burgers. Gardener's Paradise is for the green-thumbed enthusiasts. There you can find bedding plants, herbs and perennials, amongst other things. Then there's the hugely popular Ploughman's Barn. It's a cafe and restaurant that serves the most amazing breakfasts and has an array of amazing homemade cakes and treats. To top it all off, you can wander around the beautiful selection of gifts on offer at the gift shop or browse the pet shop. It really is a wonderful part of Leasingham, all ends up. Manor Farm shops cater to poultry keepers, providing a range of feedstuffs. Whether you raise chickens, ducks or geese, you'll find the essentials here. There's also something for the children here too. At Manor Farm you can see some donkeys, pygmy goats, sheep, geese, guinea pigs and budgies. Okay, so we've made it through the oldest part of Leasingham there. It's a great example, this village, of how they begin in a linear fashion, most villages, and then expand outwards. Now, speaking of expanding outwards, that's what this next section's all about. It's all residential and it's all much more modern than what you've seen so far. This next section is another residential area. From Manor Farm shops, the B1209 begins to head off onto Leasingham Moor. Flanking it to the north are a collection of residential streets off Washdyke Lane. Let's make our way through these. Now we have to make our way across the village in a diagonal fashion in order to catch our last set of landmarks. To do that, we're using a public right-of-way. This crosses Washdyke Lane and cuts straight across the green at St Andrew's Crescent. On the way, it passes one of the 2 general shops you can find in Leasingham, this Premier store. We've emerged onto Chapel Lane, and that name shouldn't be a massive surprise to us because here is an actual chapel. Built as a meeting place for the local Wesleyan Reform Union, the foundation stone of this chapel was laid in 1967 on the site of an earlier one erected in the 1850s. The chapel is now closed and it's in use as a residential dwelling. However, it's not this building that gives Chapel Lane its name. Next door to the chapel is the post office, which doubles up as Leasingham's second general store. This stands on the site of a former chapel, the one that gives the street its name. It was a Wesleyan chapel, and the likelihood is that the Reform building next door was constructed to replace that, although another source would suggest the two were once connected. Whatever the case, this post office marks our final stop on the walk. From this point onwards, it's a case of walking back to the start. That means passing through some more residential areas before we end up on Bishop's Road. Isn't Leasingham just an absolute delight? And so, with Leasingham complete, this run comes to a close. North Kesteven is down to 2, and the pair that remain are the two towns, North Hykeham and Sleaford. Join me in a few weekends' time when we'll round off the district by visiting them both, but in terms of villages, that's your lot. What a great collection North Kesteven has. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.